I was the Emperor's unsheathed wrath. I was the edge of the blade that carved a path through the galaxy's most ancient terrors. My sons were the architects of victory, sacrificed to build a foundation that was meant to last for eternity. But the Sigillite, in his constant scheming and paranoia, chose to bury my legend in silence. You call me a phantom, a relic, a ghost of a failed age. Well, so be it. I have returned to claim what is mine by right of steel, where the warrior is sovereign, unshackled from the whims of a throne that abandoned its honor. I am the Shogun, Primarch of the Second Legion, the Emperor's Dragon.
Meet the Shogun, a Kitbash Samurai Primarch for my homebrew chapter, the Crimson Oni, and today I'm going to show you exactly how I made him. Because you see, 40k has Space Marines based on medieval knights, Roman gladiators, Vikings, even Mongol warlords. Yet a fan favourite, my favourite, the samurai, are completely missing from the setting. But what if they weren't? In this series, I'm bringing this vision to life by exploring one heretical question. What would it look like if one of the Lost Legions were to return to the 41st millennium? For those of you new here, my name is Bruggy, and on this channel I create custom minis using a combination of physical and digital kit bashing, and the methods I use don't need any sculpting skills. So if you're interested, let's get started. So for this mini, we're going to be using just digital kit bashing, also known as remixing. This is the process of taking existing 3D files, modifying them, and then merging them all back together. This method is particularly appealing to me as an Australian because with our prices, making a mistake while kit bashing the traditional way is a great way to achieve bankruptcy. So I find it to be a pretty great option because you can experiment all you want, and unlike physical kit bashing, there's an undo button. And as an added bonus, there are none of the physical limitations that prevent us from reshaping and scaling parts that we want to use together. Like, let's say in the real world you want to take a gun off a tank, it's rarely going to work with an infantry model. Now software-wise, it's 100% free. 99% of the time I will just be using Mesh Mixer because it's fast and relatively intuitive, but occasionally I might need to jump into Blender for some specific tools, but generally we'll be using Mesh Mixer. So my process for digital kit bashing generally goes like this. I'll start by deciding on a character concept that I want to create, and then I'll search for a miniature I can use as the foundation that will support the pose that I'm looking to create, or at least close to it. I'll then search for parts that would support the customizations I'm looking to add. After that, I'll experiment with combining them together until I come up with a design that looks cohesive and in line with my original concept, and then finally I do a cleanup round and a test print to make sure that the mini will print correctly consistently. So for this project, the process looked like this. As a Primarch for a samurai-inspired chapter, I wanted him to be melee-focused, but he needed to convey a sense of control or confidence. I didn't want him to come across as a berserker like Angron, nor a show-off like Fulgrim. So there were many potential options out there to use as the foundation kit, but I decided to go with good old Bobby G because he has a grounded neutral pose, especially in the torso and legs, and this gave me a lot of flexibility in terms of how I could edit him from there. Once I had that vision locked, I went hunting for parts. Now again, because I'm not a sculptor, I needed to find parts that already exist to match my vision, so for those of you who are just starting out, websites like Yegi, Colts 3D, My Mini Factory, CG Trader, and Thingiverse should be your first places to look. And my biggest tip here is that when we're in this searching process for the parts that we want to use to fulfill our vision, this is where the real skill of digital kit bashing actually begins. Because when you are searching for these things, what you'll find is a lot of the time the individual parts aren't going to be designed to fit together. They come from different creators, different IPs, different scales. Sometimes you'll find something meant for cosplay. Sometimes you'll find one piece attached to a complete model or action figure that you want, and we'll have to remove it manually from the overall piece. Essentially what I'm trying to say is that generally, most of the best bits that you'll find for kit bashing aren't even meant for tabletop wargaming at all. So as digital kit bashers, I guess the skill isn't in the sculpting. It's the ability to identify parts from different use cases, find the ones that are useful to us, solve scale and compatibility issues, and then finish with our cohesive piece. So with this in mind, I found the following pieces for this kit bash. A flaming katana from this figurine, an ornate dragon spear tip from this 75mm display model, various warrior arms and armor plates with a Japanese-inspired ornamentation on top, a samurai-themed helmet, some handles and wrapping from the samurai robot kit, this dragon-themed sci-fi jetpack, and finally some odds and ends and small accessories like scrolls, lanterns, and plants that I can use as the finishing touches. Okay, so originally I was going to record this as a full tutorial, but it blew the length of the video out by 30 minutes just covering how to make the spear and the katana. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm just going to actually go through the process of what I do, and I'll just give a light overview while I'm doing it rather than treating this as a tutorial. And if you would like me to make a standalone tutorial series where I explain the actual tools that I'm using in detail, step by step, just let me know in the comments and I'll make those as standalone videos rather than just recording the actual process of making it. So for this first step, I'm selecting everything to do with the katana's blade, and I'm just isolating it from the handle, making sure that I don't select any of the handle in the process, using the standard selection tool. And once I have the blade fully isolated with none of the handle, I invert the selection and I remove the geometry that I no longer need. With the blade done, I'm now going to go over to the blade that I want to merge it with. I'm going to separate the shells, and I'm going to turn off the visibility of the original blade, and I'm going to move this blade over and align it up with the center of the katana. And there's the katana finished. Now I'm going to move on to the spear. So I'm going to turn off the visibility of the blade. I'm going to select the section of the spear that I want to keep. I only want to keep the ornate part. I don't want to keep the rest of it. I'm going to need to clean that up because it's a bit jagged. So I'm going to select these sections that contain the edges. I'm just going to remesh them so that I have more geometry to work with, so it'll be easier to flatten rather than having those spiky jagged edges. And with that done, I'll now select that nice clean edge, clean that up, and then I'm going to select thumb, clean that up as well, and then finally reselect that bottom section and make it nice and flat. So I'm going to bring over the spear arm that I want to work with. I'm going to rotate it so that it is straight, making it easier to work with. I'm going to take my spear section, give it to the bottom, I'm going to align it to the spear head, I'm going to straighten it up, I'm going to scale the whole thing down. I'm going to rotate it so that the dragon head matches the side that the hand will be facing, because the hand will be facing the front of the model. Make it nice and straight, aligning it with the middle, getting it to a position that I find that I'm happy with. Now I'm not going to get it exactly the same as the model that I printed, but that I'm quite happy with. So I'm going to accept that. See if I can bring the scale down just a tiny bit more to make it not have as much of it clipping through the model. Yep, happy enough with that. Next, I'm going to take this one, and similar to what I did before, I'm going to add a pivot and then going to align this piece by using the align tool with the bottom of the spear. Using the align tool, nice and neat. Going to bring the scale down, get it so it's nice and flat. A little bit of clipping on both sides, just needs to move a tiny bit down, tiny bit clipped. Yep, there we go. That looks relatively centered. That looks good to me. Does it go through the hand? Yes, it does. Everything lines up nicely. So I'm going to accept that. I'm going to briefly turn off the visibility. I'm now going to swap to face mode, which allows me to generate faces for easy selection. I'm going to generate face groups for this, and that looks pretty good because I just want to work with the pole arm and the base piece. And then I'm going to deselect everything that's beyond the hand because I want to keep that geometry for the overlap. I'm going to flatten that all down once I can. There we go. You can see it cuts in a little bit to the geometry of the arm. That's why I couldn't just completely delete it as I did with the other stuff, but that's okay. I can smooth that out later. I'm now going to turn back on the visibility of the spear, and then the final step will be to go through and just clean up the geometry that's clashing. So I'll quickly show you the basics of doing that now, and then I'm going to do it off camera. So you can see that there's a little bit of clipping geometry from the original spear handle, so I can either select it using the select tool and then flatten it using the F key. That's one way to do it. I can just go through each one, or I can use the sculpt tool, shrink smooth, which smooths it by reducing the size, and I can just go through and I can paint that through here. This is that tool that I was talking about in terms of turning turning a model back into kind of like a putty form. It's a great tool. I can just go through and I can clean up any of the geometry that's clipping through and push it back inside the model. So I'm just going to go through, I'm going to use that tool over and over and clean up what's left. And there, so now I've got my spear and I've got my flaming katana. Neither have been scaled to the model yet, but both pieces are ready for combining with the main body. So we'll move on to the next section. Okay, so with the weapons now done, we can move on to combining these with the foundation model of Bobby G. Now with that in mind, he was the first Loyalist Primarch to return to the setting, so his mini-release was kind of a big deal, and as such, this silhouette that you can see here is basically burnt into the collective consciousness of everyone who collects 40k. With that in mind, if I leave it intact, no amount of repainting or minor war gear changes is going to make him feel like anything other than Bobby G just with a katana slapped on. So I'm basically going to have to reconstruct most of the model, and we're going to start with the arms. So for the arm that I want to hold the katana, I've brought over a new one that supports it a bit better with a nice straight outreached arm. But obviously, if I want to bring this over, this shoulder joint is not going to align properly to Bobby G's shoulder joint, because of course it isn't. Like if I turn off the visibility of everything that we've got here and bring this over, so let me just quickly line it up. So with the shoulder joint now lined up, you can see that the range of motion I have, and obviously the scale doesn't match either, the range of motion doesn't kind of have it stretched out. It's very static. It's very, you know, a neutral arm position going off the torso. So of course it isn't going to be compatible because it was never meant to be used with a 40k miniature. This is a standalone mini from a completely different IP, or standalone arm joint, sorry, from a different IP. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to trim the original arm just above the elbow, align this arm into the gap, get the scale correct, merge them together, and then clean up what I've got left, so that way I can have the original joint that from the original model so that it fits on nicely, but I can slightly tweak the pose so that this arm is sticking out. Now just quickly, whenever I'm doing something like this and I've got this destructive random parts that are still jutting out, I always make sure to smooth these back into the original model. We need to treat it like we would whenever we're working with a standard physical kit bash, where we need to bring everything back to having nice, smooth, conjoined edges. It'll help when we get to the printing process. Now notice that I'm just finishing up by using the seam in the kind of like the elbow joint where you've got that plasteel meeting the kind of ceramite. And I'm just trying to use that as a nice overlap point. It doesn't really matter that the shoulder's damaged because it's going to be, I'll merge them together and it'll be sitting underneath the shoulder pad when it's all finished. So for now, that's probably a little bit too big, so I'm just going to scale it down just a smidge. Alright, with the arm approximately in place for what I'm wanting to do for my kit bash, I'm now going to get to scaling my sword. So here is my sword. I'm also going to need to get a hand at some point to put on the blade, but I can come back to that in a moment. And again, the idea here isn't that I want to use it on this hand, it's that I've got this blade as a reference point, so why not use it to make sure that this sword is of similar scale. So I'm just going to play with the scale until I get something that I am happy with. There you go, that handle's size is feeling more appropriate now. Now, here's a great example of where we have a scaling conflict. So I scaled the blade of the katana to the blade of the original katana blade. But again, because this was meant to be used for the large scale robot, I think what I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to disconnect the sword blade from the handle, and I'm going to have to scale them separately and bring the sword blade back into the handle. I'm going to separate these back apart, so I've got the blade again separately. Now I'm going to scale it back up. I'm going to scale that up 30%. There we go. And just like that, I have my sword scaled properly to this miniature. So now I'm just going to need to get a hand to put on here, and I'm going to put the katana in it. But for now, I'm just going to move the katana to the side and we're going to go and do the spear. Okay, so now it's time to do the spear arm. Now with this one, it's quite lucky because the joint that we already have is aligned to the pose that I'm wanting to use. So I can literally just align it at the elbow joint to the Bobby G model, and that'll be enough. So before I do that though, I'm going to turn off the visibility of the elbow that's already there. I'm also going to briefly take this arm and move it out this way. I'm not going to completely turn it off yet because I still want to use it as a scale reference when I'm scaling up this arm, but I'm going to align this to Bobby G. So I'm going to align it to the flat section of the elbow. I'm going to rotate it down till it's approximately in the pose that we want, and that's already looking really good, to be honest. That's looking quite nice. I don't think I'm going to have to scale this much at all. Move it to the center of the joint rather than sitting on top. Now we've got this cabling coming through, and the backpack's going to be replaced, but the cabling coming through, I don't want to overlap with that, so I'm just going to look to make sure I can get it off that. So now I'm just going to rotate this and tweak it a little bit until I get something that I'm happy with. Yep, that's looking nice. So we've got the spear, we've got the flat arm. So the next part to continue on to is to do the katana hand. So I'm going to do that next. Just quickly imported one of my katana hands that I've got from my collection. Now again, why, you might ask, why didn't I just use this? And that's because, again, I wanted that kind of magical energy on that katana. So I'm going to do a really quick cleanup on this, and that'll do nicely. And now I'm just going to quickly do an inspector repair, so that way it'll flatten out the edges. Now again, see how we've got a bit of invalid geometry there? That's why I normally prefer to do the flattening method rather than the select and delete method. I find it to be a lot less reliable. So I'll just do a quick shrink smooth there to repair that broken geometry. But yes, that's a big part of why I try not to do as often as possible. I try not to delete, I try to flatten. I just got a bit lazy there where I selected both halves of the sword at once. I should have done one side and then the other and done two flattened so that it was easier to repair, but no harm done. And align it to the hand joint. And whoops, this is the wrong hand. I need to mirror it. That's an easy fix. So all I need to do is select mirror, bring my mirror plane across, and then select the mirrored section and make it its own model. Turn the visibility of that one off, don't need it anymore. Create a pivot on this one, align it to the model, rotate it till it's in the pose that I want it to be in, like that. And again, you can always toy with the poses, because the great thing about creating these pivots, that again, if you want me to make a standalone tutorial video, I'll explain how all of these tools that I'm using work. I'm just showing you how I do things in this one, not doing a tutorial on it. Essentially, once you have these pivots in place, you can go back in and you can edit your pose whenever you want. So now I'm going to take my sword and I'm going to align it to the hilt there. I'm going to flip it so that it goes through. Now I'm going to drag it down, rotate, bring it up, rotate, bring it up, drag it through until it fits in the spot that I like it. That looks pretty darn good to me. Now, immediately, I think that this katana looks a little bit too long. Even though we scaled it to the Emperor's sword, I think I should have kept the blade the length of the original katana supported, because it looks a little bit too long here for my liking. So I'm just going to slightly shorten it again. So I'm going to, again, like I did last time, I'm going to separate the shells, select that blade. I'm going to scale it down to 10%, just 10% smaller, bring it back down to the handle, and then rejoin it with all of its shells that I disconnected it from, so they're all back to being one piece and combined. There we go. And now I've got the katana in, I've got the spear in. Now for the final pose, I'm probably going to want him to be looking more across himself so that that's more it. So with that in mind, I'm actually going to tweak the posing, select both parts, go into transform mode, go to the anchor point there, and I'm going to rotate the arm out a bit more straight. That's a little bit too much. Yeah, that's looking more like the pose I think I did originally. And again, I'm just looking to merge the plasteel with the ceramite so that there's a nice way to hide the seal that we're working with. Well, yep, that looks good to me. Keep that, and then I'm just going to tweak the sword to be a little bit on angle. Okay, so with the arms done, we're now going to do the torso plate, which I've imported because I realized I forgot it at the beginning. The scale of this one is obviously massive because, again, it's for that robot. When we're working with an armor replacement, this is rarely a simple swap like the like kind of what we did with the arm here, where it's just one on top of another. It's more of a merge, which is something unique to digital kit bashing because, as I mentioned earlier, using our sculpting tools, we can turn the rigid parts of the mini back into that putty form and manipulate it until we accommodate that new piece. But when we're working with armor replacements and merges where we're kind of pushing in, I really can't stress enough that when we do this, we need to make sure we push it all the way in. We don't just stack it on top. So let me show you what I'm talking about. There we go. That's kind of close. But immediately what you can see here when I'm talking about that scale issue is if I was to just... A lot of people, when they're placing and doing kit bashes, they'll get something lined up similar to this and they'll go, yeah, that looks about right on the torso. But you have to remember that the original torso plate needs to be fully obscured. We can't just kind of get away with going, there we go, nice and clean. We can just hide the other details behind. It's not a problem. Because by doing this, we've extended the side profile of this model by what? A good few centimeters maybe, and that just makes the model look like it's either really fat or it warps the scale, or sometimes makes the mini look like it's wearing its dad's clothes, like a tiny head with a giant torso. So what we really have to make sure we do, we have to push it all the way in to the point where even sometimes some of the model that we're looking for is completely obscured by the model that we're replacing, because by pushing it all the way in, we end up with knowing that we need to then clean everything up so that we can see all the details of this model again. So we're going to push it all the way in. We're going to do a little bit of alignment work, and I'm going to push this out just to make sure that lines up with the top and the bottom of the torso. Yes, it does quite nicely, and I'll push it in until it's fully encompassing the armor. Yep, that looks pretty darn good to me, and I'm going to try and line up the edge details as best I can. Now we can see that his pose has him a little bit off, a little bit of a lean to it. So I'm going to add a little bit of a lean, and that looks good to me. Okay, I might even go up just 1 degree of size. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Okay, so with that now put in place, the next thing I need to do is I need to go through with my smoothing brush, and I need to hide all of the detail that I don't want to be visible anymore. So I just want to draw your attention to a trap that a lot of people fall into, and it's a mistake that you make when doing these types of merges called a resin trap. So a resin trap occurs anytime that you have essentially a void somewhere inside of your miniature that resin during the printing process can get trapped in, hence the name resin trap, right? Creating these voids is very common when you're doing this type of smoothing work, right? Because we're putting one piece of geometry on top of another. What we're doing here is we're kind of turning one mesh back into a Play-Doh-like state and pushing it in behind the other one. If you don't get it perfectly smooth, you can end up with these little voids appearing between the new armor that you put on and the Play-Doh-like substance that you've pushed back into the armor. It is incredibly important that you go through and you check the final model for any voids. And if you find voids, you need to fix them. So there's 3 ways to fix them. One is using UV tools. And again, I'm not going to go through using UV tools in this video, but if you would like me to do a standalone guide on model repairing using UV tools, which is just a generally useful technique to know how to do if you're getting into the 3D printing hobby, I'm more than happy to do a standalone video on UV tools. But if you're not interested in that, but you would like me to do a video that covers doing mesh mixing, which is essentially, if you have these voids, you can plug them by either adding in basic geometry over here. You can add in spheres and cylinders and cubes, and then you can use those, plug these gaps that I'm talking about, or you can even select geometry of the model that you've turned into putty and you can extrude it, because everything that I'm doing at the moment is smoothing, but you can extrude it back out to have it cover that up. I'm just going to continue using the smoothing tool until everything is nice and covered, and we will come back once the torso is done. So the next step would be to take my shin pad armor, where I've got my dragon here. I'm going to mirror it because I'm going to need 2, and I'm going to place these onto the shins And once I place them on the shins, I'm going to cut the video and come back when the merging is done, because it's just basically the exact same process that we did for the torso, where I'm going to take my shin pad, I'm going to add a pivot to it, I'm going to align it to the shin pad that already exists. I'm then going to, from that pivot point, I'm going to scale it. 1.5 looks about right, but it's a little bit too thick, so I'm going to scale 1.5 in all directions, but I'm going to only go 1.3 in the width direction. Again, these types of where you're not scaling uniformly, make sure that you're checking the model to make sure it doesn't look like you've warped it too much. You need to be very careful when you're doing non-uniform, especially when you're working with shapes that you want. Like if you've got a pattern that has a lot of circles in it or squares in it, they'll turn to rectangles and ovals, so you need to be very aware of what you're doing when you do those types of kit bashes. Sorry, when you make those types of alterations. And I just want to make sure that I have this all nice and lined up. And I'm using the seam of the armor joint as my reference point of where I want this to go. In fact, I'm going to go a tiny bit thinner, just a little bit more greed on my width. Okay, so it's a 1.5, 1.5, and 1.25. The reason why I'm making note of that is because I mirrored the leg, remember, and I want to make sure that I stay consistent. If it worked for this one, it should work for the other. So 1.5, 1.5, 1.25. I'm going to do that now and save that just so I've got that as my other shin, creating a pivot, aligning to the other leg, roughly aligning it to the seam of the armor joint, just looking to hijack the design language of the original model wherever I can to make the cleanup job easier if possible. So I'm going to go and do modifications now to the underlying mesh to make sure they merge together nicely, and then we'll come back and we'll pick up where we left off. And now the legs have been smoothed so that the meshes overlap nicely. So now we've got the torso, we've got the legs, we've got our arms, and we've got our spear and katana. So with all of that being done now, essentially we're on to the easy stuff. The final parts are all elements that just need to be test fitted and lie on top, because we've got our hip guards, our groin protector, our general extra parts, our katanas for the hip plate, our backpack, power pack, and things like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm now going to off camera do all of the scaling and test fitting, but literally all I'm going to be doing, I'll do one of them on camera and then I'll do the rest of them off camera, and then we'll go through and do a quick summary. But for this one here, for example, I'm going to take the shoulder, I'm going to create a pivot, align it to the model, but there's really not going to be a whole lot of cleanup to do for these ones, unlike what we had to do for the others, because I'm going to line it up with the model. And once it's in place, I'm going to scale it to what I think is appropriate. 25% bigger for now, but if I end up wanting it a different size later, I'll tweak it. But there, essentially you can see what all I'm doing is I'm just test fitting to make sure it lines up and looks how I want it to look and how I want it to be when it's finished. So I'm not going to waste your time going through and just doing the test fitting, because I'm not going to be doing any manipulation of the mesh. I'm just placing and scaling and orientating things. So I'll be back when that's completed. All right, and we're back. Now, I'm well aware that this moment probably feels a lot like that classic meme of the draw two circles, then draw the rest of the bloody owl, in terms of how much has changed since we last saw the model. But in terms of the steps that we took, there really hasn't been much added, and I'm just going to quickly go through what changed since you last saw the model. So, if you look before, so we had the two shin guards and the torso piece that we joined. We also have the arm with the katana hand and the arm with the spear hand. All that's been added since there is I took this Oni shield piece and I literally just lined it up with the torso to the point where it was connecting in a place that I liked, to add a little bit of samurai ornamentation to the torso. We have the two shoulders that have been scaled and placed appropriately to cover all of that clashing mesh, and you can see what I'm talking about now in terms of you can barely see the seam on the arm because it's all covered up by the shoulder pads. The backpack has been pushed into place, and you can see here that I've put some of the scrolls attached to the backpack, but if I move these out of the way for a moment, you can see that the hole that was in the backpack, whether or not you noticed it originally, I've just filled with a cube. I just took the mesh mixer, added a cube, and I just scaled it and placed it in the gap so that way there's no giant void in the middle of the backpack to create a resin trap when I put this on top. Beyond that, we've got the helmet. Literally, it's just the helmet that we had, and I just placed it into the neck recess. We've got the two hip plates that are just placed on top. There's no magical science. Same with the sword. I just put the sword on top of the hip plate, and I just put them both on top of the original leg piece, slightly cutting in, so I'll join it in. We've got the front groin plate, which again, just placed on top like any other piece. Nothing fancy going on there. Now this custom logo, I'm not going to go through how I made that in this video. Again, the whole point of this series is that you can follow along with me, and then through the series you can ask me for tutorial guides on certain parts in each video, because this video is already long enough as it is, and I haven't even done any tutorials in this one. So just know that I designed a logo, I created an SVG, and I turned it into a 3D model to put onto the armor. And obviously the elephant in the room is this giant flag that's come out of nowhere. Similar idea if you want to have a if you would like me to do a standalone tutorial and I can explain to you not just how you can do custom logos and custom symbols, but then how you can use those logos and symbols to either lie on top of or create recess detail on any curved surface, which is a really useful skill to build because it allows you to put text, symbols, logos onto curved surfaces like shoulder pads, or have them fit onto things like flags or onto capes. So it's really useful, especially on capes, because you can see here that my flag is bending and that the symbol that I've got kind of cutting into it has bent along with it, so it's not just a flat. It works on curved surfaces, not just flat surfaces. And if you're curious as to why I had it push recess detail rather than sit on top like the flags that you get from Games Workshop, it's because I'm going to have this flag be an off-white, and I'm going to use black ink using capillary action to fill this in. The Iron Halo, the custom Iron Halo, I took the spirit ring from that robot pack and the base from an Iron Halo, and I just combined them together and lined them up with the backpack. And other than that, the only other thing that I added was I got a cracked earth base from one of many suppliers of basing kits that you can get online. I think this one's from Tabletop Minis or something. I lined it up with the original base. I deleted the rim of the original base, so it was just a flat topper on top, lined it up, and then into the original base I added a couple of lanterns, so I just placed them into the original mesh randomly. I placed two kind of like alien looking Japanese inspired plants. I think they're based off the plants that come with Farsight. I think the designer based it off that aesthetic at least, which I quite liked. And other than that, the model is complete. So it's literally now just a process of printing and painting the model. As I mentioned before, in this video, I'm not going to go through the printing process because there are many tutorials out there from channels that are dedicated purely to 3D printing. This channel is going to be mainly about 3D kit bashing, physical kit bashing, and creating custom armies. But as I mentioned before, please leave a comment down below if there's anything in particular you'd like me to do tutorial style videos on, and I'll do those as an aside to complement this series. So I'll be doing the videos that show you how I make things, and then from those, if you see something in that video you'd like to learn how to do yourself, rather than just seeing me do it, I will make a standalone tutorial for it. But with that all being said, with this model now complete and ready for printing, I'm going to show you the finished product. Thank you for watching my first video. It really does mean a lot to me. If you enjoyed it and would like to see more, please consider hitting like and subscribing to the channel, because I hope you'll agree, if this technique works for me as someone who can't sculpt, it can work for you too. If you're interested in how I painted my Primarch, you can click here, or if you would like to see some more kit bashing goodness, next up we'll be making a Terminator Captain, which will be linked now as soon as the video is live. Please tell me in the comments if you'd like me to go deeper on anything. Supports, text engraving, symbol overlays, advanced reposing, because this video is just the start, and I'll see you in the next one.